back to my Ruger American Rimfire project, or at least reassembly. I've already done the trigger, butt pad, and now it's time to put back my Picatinny rail. Now, why does this look so different? Well, this particular rail from EGW, which is nicely made, it looks good, no problems with the fit or the finish. But I did have a problem with my clearance, or lack thereof, with my iron sights. So the way this was, which I wish I had noticed before I bought it, was instead of this radius, it was flat, and it was right about there, and it completely blocked my view of the rear sight. So let's say if I had this on there, like so, and I wanted to shoot iron sights, I couldn't. Because, yeah, the rear sight flips up because there's no sight, but I couldn't see the rear sight. So I couldn't shoot iron sights with this rail on there. So I took this down over to my mill with a nice radius bullnose end mill, and I hobbed out the middle a good bit. So now, when it's on there, and I'll probably roll in a picture somewhere along the lines, now you could see the iron sights. So I plan on putting a 1:4 optic on this rifle with quick release rings, and use it as a bit of a practice trainer, close quarters gun. Should be fun, but I got to put this back on. This was already on once before, and I use, of course, blue Loctite. I never use red, and I like using blue Loctite because I have had experiences where even though everything's fully torqued down, the screws just come loose. You never want to have to deal with that. So first I'm going to have to clean the Loctite off these little screws. I don't know the size of these, but I know that they're small. They're probably like number 832s. A little bit on the threads. Might be a little hard to see, but because they're so little and these threads are so small, you don't really have to go crazy cleaning everything up. Same thing goes to the top of the receiver. You can see there's actually a little bit of marking up here. And what happened was, one time it was raining, and I was shooting, and I brought it back, and the gun wasn't wet. It didn't get wet from the rain, but there must have been condensation built up, and there's a little bit of rust that formed under here. So I was very taken back by that. And I have read reports that people with rails, sometimes that don't put anything in between there, will sometimes have rust built up. So I cleaned this up a little bit with some very light Scotch-Brite. I am going to hit this with acetone, and then I'm going to put a little Loctite under there to hopefully remedy some of the situation over here. I don't know how well it's going to work out, and I am nervous about Loctite getting in the roll pin for the bullet release, but I don't know what else to do. And I don't want to leave it like that because I don't want this getting too rusty. First things first, we got to take some acetone and either rag or these shop towels work great because they're very tough. And I'm going to clean off the bolts, clean off the receiver, Loctite everything up, and then torque everything down. If you are doing this for the first time and you've never done this before and you don't have any tooling, please don't run the risk of stripping out the threads on your receiver. Yes, this is a steel receiver. No, you do not want to strip them out. Get a torque wrench. It doesn't have to be a fat wrench. There are other ones out there. There are less expensive ones out there. They're just lever brake ones. Just get anything, because the last thing you want to do is strip out the threads on your rifle and then, not be able to use it. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take the screw, pinch it in the towel, and spin it counterclockwise, thus as if you were trying to remove it. And what should theoretically happen is the Loctite will loosen up because of the acetone and pull off. And you can see we've got a good bit of it off already. So I'm going to do this for the 4 screws, and then I'm going to just wipe down the receiver. There isn't any grease or any residue of Loctite inside the screw holes, so I'm not even going to bother cleaning that out. Again, this is on a rimfire, but the blue Loctite should be more than enough to keep everything tight. If you have any nails, which even though I'm using gloves just so the acetone doesn't get through, but when you pinch the paper towel around the screw, try to put your nail into where the threads would be and unscrew it. And sometimes you might get lucky and your nail will just be able to put a little bit more pressure on the threads, and you'll be able to get a lot more Loctite off that way. The 4 screws are all cleaned up. You can see we got a lot of Loctite off of the threads. Nice and disgusting. Now acetone evaporates very quickly, so I am going to moisten this up just a little bit more. And now I'm going to clean the receiver and the underside of the rail. I like using acetone primarily because it's very inexpensive. It's readily available pretty much in any hardware store you go, and it's pretty inexpensive. Now for the top of this receiver, I'm just going to go over it as best I can. I hope to never have to take this rail off again. What am I going to do with the part of exposed aluminum on the inside? I'm actually thinking about maybe one day dirt coating this, and I know that would involve me probably taking most of the componentry off, but I do love coyote tan or brown, any of the earth tone colors. So that will be a project for a later time. I have so many other things going on right now. It's really, really far on the back burner, but I'd really love to paint this, give it an overall different feel. So we're just going to hit the bottom of the scope rail. And there's not a whole lot of dirt under here. Minimal at best. But at least now we know it's degreased, it's cleaned up, and there's nothing that we're going to have to worry about causing any issues for when we mount this thing up. So I'm going to do a dry run of putting the rail up. Beautiful. And I'm going to do the rear screws. I'm just going to tighten them up finger tight. And this front one that I put in first, I'm just going to back out. And all I'm going to make sure is that those screws keep the rail down, and they do. So there's no movement going on in there. So whatever worries I had are now gone, because I know that it's not going to bottom out in the threads, it's actually going to seat properly. Now this is my first time putting Loctite on the bottom side of the scope rail. I like to give it a good shake, make sure everything inside is mixed up. And I'm just going to put a very small amount just around the outside. This way it'll create a little bit of a barrier. I don't want to put too much on this because the last thing I want to do is have it go in places that I don't want it to go. Make sure there's a good helping of it. I think that's going to do the trick. And it's very important now that when I flip this over, I line this up like so. Perfect. Beautiful. I don't even see anything dripping out of the side, but I'll get to that soon. What also happens is with the blue Loctite or red Loctite. Don't use red Loctite because you'll probably never get these screws out again. Last thing you want to do is have these not come out on you. The blue Loctite is also going to keep the rail in line, so it's not going to fall off by accident. I'm just going to put a very small amount on the first few threads, like so. Whenever you're using Loctite or grease or anti-seize, put it on the first threads, not on the back threads, because now when we screw this into the receiver, it'll actually push through the rest of the threads that are going to be getting engaged. So now you don't have to worry about, is it going to go on there? If you put the Loctite towards the back, it might not get to those first threads, and you don't want that. Now I'm going to get these all hand tight, and by hand tight I mean just barely in there. Because when I go to lock this up and torque this down, I have to make sure it's going to be right. Make sure the Loctite's all the way around the threads, which it is. Get it in the hole. Beautiful. Again, just finger tight. I do the inside screws first, then I work my way out. This way, hopefully, they'll sit down. They'll seat as easily and as evenly as possible. There we go. Now I can go with the outer holes. You don't want to put too much, but you also don't want to put too little. I feel like right there where that is, that's pretty much perfect. And there we go. I'm going to wipe this tip off because I don't want that locking up on the cap. Because I actually want to be able to reuse this at some point in time. You keep it nice and clean. It might actually come apart on you when you need it to. Put that off to the side. Okay, now the rail's on. I don't see any Loctite pouring out the side, so that's one thing that I didn't have to worry about. Now I'm going to start torquing these down. Now EGW I think claims 20 inch-pounds on these, which sounds about right considering how small they are. I'm not going to jump straight to 20 inch-pounds. I'm probably going to start at 10, go from the inside to the outside, then 15 inside to outside, and then finally 20 inside and outside. Reason I do that is this way it should settle evenly. You never want to go full torque values on anything, one and then the other, because it might twist a little bit, it might cock a little bit, and then you're left out with either something that you might damage it, you might pull the threads out, it might not seat properly, and when you go put your scope on there, if you're using the gauges, they might not line up. So a bunch of things to keep in mind. All right, so I'm going to start by taking my torque wrench, and now this doesn't start at 5 inch-pounds, but I'm going to put it just under 10, and that should be good enough for me. Let's do about 10. Put in my driver, or my bit, I should say. Make sure this is fully seated and straight. You don't want to have this cocked. And that's about 5 or so. And then I'm going to go back over the first one that I did. Excellent. Now I'm going to work this up to 10. And again, I'm going to start with the same one. This might get tedious. You know, you're doing the same repetitive thing 3 or 4 times. But I'd rather be safe than sorry. And now up to 20. And 20 is going to be the end of it. It's probably like around 21 or so. And that's it. Whenever you're done with your torque wrench, always set it back down to 0 or as close to 0 as you can. You don't want to leave tension on the spring. You could strip it. Well, not strip it, but you can weaken the spring and thus, you know, throw off your torque specs. That's it. Rail is on. There's no seepage. Well, I see a little bit. I stand corrected. There's a little bit of seepage of blue Loctite coming from the back of the cartridge port. A little bit on there. The front, the same thing. That's a good thing. That means that it's fully seated. And now, if there was any a little gap in there, that gap's going to be sealed. Because once that stuff cures, it's going to create, hopefully, a moisture-resistant barrier and never, ever rust under there again. And hopefully, like I said, I'll never have to remove this again. But if I do, at least with the blue Loctite, these screws should come right out. The rail should knock right off. Maybe a small tap from a rubber mallet, hit it from the back. It should slide right off. And, you know, clean it up, acetone, a little bit of elbow grease, and that'll go a long way. All right, thanks for watching. I hope you found it useful. If you liked it, please like and subscribe. Again, thanks for watching.